It's my nerd world. I'm Jon Justice, and welcome to a Star Wars podcast. Just one show this week. I'll explain when we get into the show here in just a moment. We're not going to ignore the virus in the room. We're all dealing with it right now, right? There's a lot of fear and uncertainty, and I feel that it's really important to make sure that we gravitate towards those things that provide us joy, and that certainly is Star Wars, right? So we'll get into all that coming up on the show. It's going to be a real honest show this week. They always are, but you know, this is affecting everybody, and we can't ignore it, but we're still going to have some fun. Passing of a legend on the show this week. We'll talk about the passing of Max von Sydow briefly. We will get into waiting on The Rise of Skywalker. Digital release comes out the 17th. I personally can't wait. We'll discuss a little bit of the book, the expanded version of The Rise of Skywalker, and the book that's coming out and all the controversy that the leaked information from the book has been causing. We will also get into one line in A New Hope that changed Star Wars. I mean, it really did. One line kind of changed everything. And then because we are just doing one show this week, we'll get into listener feedback at the end of the show. You can always email TalkShowNerd@gmail.com or leave a comment up on YouTube. My Nerd World and a Star Wars podcast is brought to you by the science fiction space opera series EMBARK. Book 3, The Vanishing War, in the opening trilogy of the EMBARK Earth series, comes out next month. So if you're not caught up already, head on over to Amazon.com, especially since a lot of us are going to be stuck at home. Head on over to Amazon.com and pick up your preferred version, ebook, paperback, or audiobook narrated by me. Just search for Jon, Jon Justice, and EMBARK. You'll find it there.
It's an instinct. A feeling. The Force brought us together. We're not alone. Good people will fight if we lead them.
People keep telling me they know me. No one does.
But I do.
Long have I waited. And now, you're coming together. Is your undoing.
Confronting fear is the destiny of a Jedi. Your destiny. The Force will be with you.
Always.
My Nerd World.
Boy, that line from The Rise of Skywalker, from Luke Skywalker, that was in the trailer in the movie of confronting fear is the destiny of a Jedi. Boy, I'm not going to lie, that almost gets me tearing up a little bit. Welcome to My Nerd World, the Star Wars podcast. I am your host, Jon Justice. One show this week in light of everything that's going on around the world right now with this coronavirus. We're going to talk a bit about that. As of right now, it's 3:54 a.m. in the morning on Friday, and I'm preparing to go to work, and a lot of changes are being made even where I work. For those that are just listening for the first time, I'm a full-time radio talk show host. I've been doing radio for 24 years. The first several years of my career was in rock and alternative rock afternoon and morning shows. And then I made the transition back in 2006, essentially. I started in 96. In 2006, I made the transition over to talk radio. And currently doing the Justice and Drew show here on Twin Cities News Talk in Minneapolis, Minnesota. And it's been a daunting week. being a talk show host and having to cover what's going on. So we're gonna get a little bit into that. I'm recording the show early and just doing one show this week. One thing, I get up at 2:30 in the morning every day anyways, Monday through Friday, to do the radio show. It's on 6 until 9 Central Time here in America, depending on where you're listening. And I got up this morning like at 1 o'clock, and I couldn't go back to sleep, and was looking forward to doing the show. I want to do the show this week. I'm hoping that perhaps this can provide a bit of respite from everything that's going on right now, even though we are going to talk a little bit about that. But I also just wanted to do one show this week because I want to get it out of the way and just spend time with my family, enjoying their company, keeping ourselves safe, and watching Star Wars. To be honest with you, that's kind of my plan for this weekend. So as we get into the show, let's go ahead and start off here. Some sad news. And these are always, at least in my opinion, the passing of actors and screen legends, especially later in life. It's kind of twofold, right? You mourn their loss and their family, who've obviously lost a loved one, but at the same time, you look at an individual like Max von Sydow, who had a 70-year career, died at the age of 90, and once again, those words of Yoda pop into my head of, do not, don't mourn those that pass mourn them, do not miss them, do not celebrate those that pass into the Force. I believe in the Lord God Almighty. I love the comparisons in Star Wars that have always been there from the beginning in A New Hope of the Force, to sort of religion, regardless of what that religion is. It's one of the parts of the mythology of Star Wars that I think so many of us love so much, especially those of us that are religious. I'm not turning this into a religious podcast. I'm just sharing my thoughts with you. So while we mourn for the family that lost Max von Sydow, we also celebrate his career. He lived a long and fruitful life and provided entertainment for millions and millions of people, and really elevated the opening of The Force Awakens with his role as Lor San Teka. So just wanted to make sure that I mentioned the passing of a screen legend as we open the show this week. So this coronavirus sucks. Let's be honest, right? And I know we got a lot of listeners outside of America, and we're obviously dealing with it now. It's been spreading across Europe. This is a completely unprecedented thing that we're all experiencing right now. And, I go back to what Luke said, in that confronting fear is the destiny of a Jedi. We're all kind of Jedi right now. I don't mean to make it corny, but maybe we need a little corniness, and maybe we need a little Star Wars right now to take a break. Many of us are going to be practicing social distancing. My plan is, I'm going in to do my radio show, but I'm going in and going out, to the garage, in the car, to the parking garage, upstairs to the studio, show, and then out. That's going to be, my life for the next several weeks as everything sort of grinds to a halt. I want to offer up perhaps a perspective on this that will help, and we'll lend it to Star Wars, and we'll definitely get into Star Wars. I'm not going to make this about the coronavirus, but how can we ignore what's going on right now, right? I'm personally going to look at what's happening right now as another holiday. During the holiday season around the world, business grinds to a halt. The sporting events wrap up their seasons and their championships as we head into October and November and December every single year, with the Halloween, Thanksgiving, and Christmas holidays before we get to New Year's, and everything slows down and we spend a lot of time at home. Unlike holidays, we won't be spending a lot of time traveling, but we will be spending a lot of time at home with our immediate family. And for me, I'm going to look at this and this slowdown of life as, well, while the reasons why this is happening suck and are scary, there's an opportunity here, and let's treat it, like we do around the holidays, and be around family and enjoy those things that bring us joy. I already watch a lot of Star Wars. I'm not going to lie. I'm going to be consuming even more Star Wars during this period of time, and I'm really looking forward to getting through today's show. It's, relatively speaking, being a talk show host, especially on a news talk station where my job is always to entertain. That's always been my role. And it's the same thing when it comes to this podcast. I don't do radio. I do radio to make a living, but I don't do radio and my news talk show, and I never have to push any particular agenda. I have my own views, but I'm not there to get people elected or to push policy. I'm there to share my thoughts and ultimately to entertain. So when we have to deal with situations like what we're dealing with right now, and kind of put aside the entertainment aspect of it, it's daunting. It's daunting. And so I was really, like I said before, I was really looking forward to doing the show this week. And I like the fact that for me personally, doing this before I get to the regular show feels really good to talk a little Star Wars. So if you can, maybe treat it like a holiday. Take care of yourself, love your family, and watch some Star Wars. And feel free to email me, and we'll get into, we'll talk more about this next week. TalkShowNerd@gmail.com. Leave a comment up on YouTube. I'm also going to work on some more writing. I'll talk about that at the end of the podcast. But if you need an outlet, let's put it this way: if you need an outlet and you just need to write to somebody or something, or just need to get your mind off it, shoot me an email, TalkShowNerd@gmail.com, or leave a comment up on YouTube, regardless of what it is. Sometimes it's just good to get stuff out, and feel free to use this show. Even if it's not, look, it can be about anything. I don't care. I don't care if it's about what you're dealing with, how you're dealing with this coronavirus situation, what it's like in your part of the world. If you just need to vent or just want to ask some questions to talk about on next week's show, do not hesitate to email me. I can't wait for The Rise of Skywalker to come out next week on digital. I'm definitely going to be buying a hard copy of the movie, a physical copy, come the 31st. I'm still kicking around the idea of whether or not I want to buy the complete $250 box set, which just looks utterly amazing. I really want to get my hands on it, but again, because of the situation we're feeling with right now, spending $250 on a bunch of Star Wars movies that I already own probably isn't the smartest thing to do right now. We're all going to have to call this into question. I've mentioned it before, and I want to mention it again and talk a little bit about what potential good could come out of this global pandemic we're dealing with. But as I've mentioned, I really love The Rise of Skywalker, and I've got a copy here at home. Right, I've talked about that. I'm not going to lie. There's been a leaked copy out there for a while, and I've watched the copy here at home a few times. But I've been starving myself because I really want to watch the good copy here coming up in the next few weeks. We're actually coming up next week on Tuesday when the digital release comes out. But this movie continues to interest me. My excitement to watch it again hasn't waned at all. I've said before, and I'll say it again, I think the soundtrack for The Rise of Skywalker is amazing, and it's the first time that a soundtrack has moved me the way that the Empire Strikes Back soundtrack still does. I think that this is some of John Williams' best work, and I just absolutely adore this movie. And at the moment, if somebody were to ask me, and again, I don't rate the films, I don't rank them, because it changes constantly. But if somebody were to come to me and say, hey, right now, as it stands, what is your favorite trilogy of the three? I would say the sequel trilogy. I absolutely, this, of course, is prefaced by you can't get to the sequel trilogy without the original trilogy, to a certain extent, the prequel trilogy. But I just really, really adore this movie. And The Rise of Skywalker, and all three of the films. And I really do believe, and I think I mentioned this last week, but I'll say it again, I really do believe that when we get down the line and we get more Star Wars theatrical content, that the sequel trilogy is going to be looked back on with a much different view and lens. And I think that The Rise of Skywalker is going to come out being more popular and less divisive than what we've currently seen from it. And we'll talk a little bit about the book, because I was listening to Knights of Vader. Knights of Vader this week, by the way, they Zach and his group that he's got right now, he's got a fantastic set of hosts, Zinger, and then this new female host that Zach has been having on his show, Mackenzie. It's been some really, really good discussions. I've been disagreeing with a lot of what they've been saying, but I have really been enjoying the discussion, and it's no fun if we agree on everything. But they've got the most recent episode of Knights of Vader focuses on some of the additions that the Rise of Skywalker novel brings to the overall story from the Rise of Skywalker, the film. So we'll talk a little bit about that here in just a moment. I'll share my thoughts. I'm going to be going the opposite route of what Knights of Vader have been kind of saying. I love what the book is doing, and I think that it's a very important role that it plays in partnership with movies, with the fandom, and the potential of what it can do for the fandom. So I'm all on board with the changes, and not even changes, but the additions and the further details that we're getting from the book that weren't in the movie, and I'm fine that they're not in the movie. Before I do that, though, I just want to say one thing. This coronavirus COVID-19 pandemic it has the potential, and I believe it is going to change a lot of things within society. For those that lived through and were young enough to, or were old enough at the time to really be paying attention during 9/11, the world changed on that day. I was doing a radio show in Riverside, San Bernardino, alternative rock show in Riverside, San Bernardino, when that whole thing went down. And it was just a very weird time, a scary time. I'll never forget it for as long as I live. But there's a difference with what we're dealing with now. In terms of scale, there's different circumstances. A terrorist attack on America, claiming the lives that it did, and this global pandemic, right? They're two completely different things. However, the thing that I keep taking away is that stuff is going to change. The shutting down of all these sporting events and conventions, and who knows what's going to happen with Star Wars Celebration. Disneyland and the Disney parks in America are shut down to the end of the month now. I mean, this is just unprecedented and unheard of. And the big difference for me is, while the comparison between 9/11 and what we're dealing with this pandemic, certainly on a global level, it affects everybody. This affects everybody around the planet more so than 9/11 did. But 9/11 brought about some really big societal changes, from the government aspect and the Patriot Act to the way that we consume our news, the ticker that goes across the bottom of the news screen. For those that don't know, that didn't exist in mainstream media prior to 9/11. Things are going to change drastically after this pandemic is over, and it's going to largely be dependent on how long it ends up lasting. I think there's a lot of potential that Disney streaming service and the way that we get our movies and our movie-going experience could exponentially change. Movies are being delayed until next year. Fast 9 has been delayed until next year. There's looking at Black Widow's being delayed. A Quiet Place 2. Thank goodness The Rise of Skywalker came out already. Can you even imagine how nuts we would all be going right now? Again, all things being relative as a Star Wars podcast, but can you even imagine if Star Wars was coming out and they delayed it? Oh my gosh, it would just be crazy. But I think that there's a big possibility that the movie-going experience that we're so used to could change drastically as people are stuck at home consuming stuff on TV and get used to that. I've seen a lot of people online that have been making the argument. Manabyte.com. Jeremy, he's a great guy, hosts Marvel Cinematic Universe podcast, also Star Wars Unity is another podcast. Jeremy Conrad. He posted that perhaps Disney and Bob Iger will decide to release some of these theatrical movies on the Disney streaming service because they're not going to come out in theaters because people are going to be stuck at home. I think that would be amazing. He also suggested, and this is probably more specific, he also suggested that Disney Plus should put out any finished projects that they have for the streaming service immediately because people are going to be stuck at home. There's one more thing that I hope is an unintended consequence of this coronavirus, and this is what I wanted to zero in on. I hope this helps the fandom. I really do. What I say next might bother some of you, and I'm just being honest. And so you're entitled to your opinion. I would never take that away or say my opinion's better than yours, or the right or the correct opinion and yours isn't. I would never ever go and say that. This is just my perception. But I really do hope that when it comes to these divisions in the fandom, going back to The Last Jedi, and then certainly this fallout from The Rise of Skywalker, and more specifically the treating of Kylo Ren and Ben Solo, I hope this puts a proper perspective on all of that. I certainly understand people's frustrations. I don't relate to it because I love what was done with Ben Solo in The Rise of Skywalker. I actually think that J.J. Abrams treated that character almost perfectly, in my opinion. When you look at the parameters that one is in crafting a movie that needs to be a particular length and what needs to be done in that movie, and to get a character like Kylo Ren to a place where we accept that he is now Ben Solo, that is not an easy task as a storyteller. And what JJ did in starting this relationship in the story between these two amazing characters. Rey is probably my favorite character in all of Star Wars. I just adore her. I think she's awesome. And her performance in The Rise of... Daisy Ridley's performance of Rey and Rey's character in The Rise of Skywalker is probably my favorite character performance in all of the films together. She just is electrifying on the screen and emotional and compelling and funny. But starting with The Force Awakens, and then what Rian Johnson did so masterfully in The Last Jedi, and then going to The Rise of Skywalker, this isn't easy for any content creators, and certainly not content creators that are having to piggyback off of what other content creators have done, to get Kylo Ren and Ben Solo to a place where he throws his lightsaber away, brings himself back from the dark side, and then ends up giving the ultimate sacrifice to give Rey back to the galaxy. I just think that was done absolutely beautifully. I really, really do. And by comparison, I know that there are some people that have complained about how we only got Ben for a few minutes at the end of the movie, and maybe I shouldn't use my tone that way, and I apologize. That was rude. So people have said, we only got Ben Solo for a little while at the end of the movie. I wanted more Ben Solo, and I get that, and I understand that, and I can certainly, you have every right to go and feel that way. For me, when I look at that, would I have liked more Ben Solo? Absolutely. I think it would have been rad if we had like a full movie of Ben Solo and Rey. I think it would be incredible, especially seeing what Adam Driver was able to do in Ben Solo. I mean, the juxtaposition of Kylo Ren to when he's Ben Solo, it's amazing. You look at this character, he's evil, he's conflicted, he's messed up, he's got this goofy mask, and he's fighting the dark side. He's talking to, burned relics of an evil person. And yet, when he has this vision of his father and he throws his lightsaber away, and the moment he shows up on Exegol, man, he's a different character, even though he's still the same person. It's amazing. But you go back and look at the original trilogy, and, well, we didn't get any of that. I mean, we got Anakin Skywalker pre-Darth Vader, right? But when you get to Return of the Jedi, Darth Vader's redeemed and then he dies. I mean, we don't get it. We don't get any of sort of Darth Vader, Anakin Skywalker in the Vader suit redeemed. And it's probably not a fair comparison. The way those stories play out, it doesn't really lend itself to that. I'm just saying that the way that it was handled in The Rise of Skywalker, I feel like we got the best of everything. And I just hope that perhaps this fear and this uncertainty that we have right now on a global level will provide some perspective on the things that we love. And I'll phrase it this way. Maybe those that have had such a hard time with The Rise of Skywalker and were so angry and frustrated, maybe through this and looking at the situation through a different lens will provide them the ability to have a level of enjoyment of the film that they didn't the first time. That's what I hope, right? Not to say you don't have to change your opinion. It's not to say that you have to sit back and go, oh, I'm not mad that Ben Solo died anymore. I'm not saying that at all. But maybe some perspective on this is just a movie, right? They're amazing storytelling. That they're a part of our lives. It's a lifestyle. With the three things that I love apart from God and my family, you look at NASCAR, Depeche Mode, and Star Wars. When you're a fan of something, it becomes a part of your life, and those three things are a big part of my life. And Star Wars is probably the biggest one. So I really hope people are able to find some joy from this film, because for those of us that do find joy, it's a lot of fun, man. It really, really is it's just a fun movie, and it's so enjoyable to watch. And it's disappointing when I just feel bad for anybody that doesn't get any enjoyment out of it. Even something, and then we're going to move on because I'm kind of wiping out on this, but even something that I've criticized of the film with like the end space battle and how I would have liked to have seen more. They've been releasing all these behind the scenes clips as of late on from StarWars.com, and they did this behind the scenes of all of the, the thousands upon thousands of ships showing up on Exegol and talking about how, they needed to create more ships. And it was an IO9 article. I thought more about it because you've heard me mention on the show, if you've listened before, that I wish that end battle was a little bit more linear and followed specific dogfights more of like what we saw in A New Hope with the battle on the Death Star or the beginning of Revenge of the Sith. But it was funny because as I was prepping for the show today, I realized, I went, well, you know what? There's not a single large-scale battle in The Empire Strikes Back, and I adore that movie. So again, we have so much Star Wars that you can pick whatever movie you want to get what you want. And that shifted my perspective at the end of the film when I watch it and I go, oh, I wish I would have seen this or that. I kind of go, you know what? I'm really happy we got what we got because in some movies we didn't get any big space battle. It's also one of the things that I love so much about The Last Jedi, and I think, who was I listening to? It might have been Knights of Vader. I'm not sure. Maybe it was somebody else. But somebody made a comment about The Last Jedi and how they felt that it honored Star Wars, but presented something different and unique in still honoring what came before. And I couldn't agree more with The Last Jedi. The Last Jedi does have like a little bit of everything that I want in a Star Wars film. So perhaps through all of this and this fear and this pandemic, some perspective on, that's not to say that Star Wars isn't important, right? But it is certainly not the most important thing. So since it's not the most important thing and it's something that provides us joy, I just pray that people can find more joy within the fandom and within these films now that we've moved on past a time where there was a lot of frustration of individuals who didn't like the movie or the choices that were made. So, you know what? If I'm full of hooey, that's totally cool. I just felt like that needed to be said. And all right, let's go ahead and and move on.
Something inside me has always been there, but now it's awake, and I need help.
So we've been reading excerpts on the show from the novel version, the expanded edition of The Rise of Skywalker. There's another couple of pages that came out this week that talk a bit about how Rey was creating her own lightsaber and she'd been working on it for a long time. And I was inspired to talk about this a little bit on the show after listening to, as I mentioned, the Knights of Vader, because Zach and the guys over there, Zinger and Mackenzie, they were being critical, whatever. They're not overly negative over there. They're pretty good when it comes to their speculation and analyzing of stuff. And Zach's a great host. I don't like an abundance of negativity, so I usually turn it off. And I don't turn off Knights of Vader, so that's kind of my standard. I don't think it's that negative. But there's some things I disagree with. I know that they were talking on the show, and there was a lot of back and forth about the addition of clones and Palpatine being in a clone body and Snoke being a clone, and then you got the son of Palpatine being a failed clone, and why didn't he look exactly the same? And the book expands upon a lot of stuff that's not in the movie. Why wasn't it in the movie? I love how this works personally. Okay, let's start off with films. Like I said before, films have to work within a box. Some films are allowed to get away with going longer, like 3 hours. You can't really go much more than 3 hours in a major motion picture. Only like the largest of large tentpole films can go and pull that off. Certainly, Endgame was one of them. Talked a bit about that last week, and we'll get into it with listener feedback. Some people had comments. I made some comparisons between the MCU and Star Wars on listener feedback last week. Or it might have been on the regular show. Either way, so the movie's got to work within certain parameters. What I like specifically about what J.J. Abrams did with The Rise of Skywalker is when you look at crafting a movie or creating a story and you're looking at different perspectives, there's certain things that you're going to have to push off to the side to let the audience go and figure out and fill, because you got these other things that you need to do to move forward and keep the story moving forward. And I know there have been people that have complained that why didn't we get more of an explanation of, say, Snoke or Palpatine when they could have shaved off time from this, and this from the movie to go and do that. I would argue that shaving time off of those things that people were mentioning, particularly action sequences, would end up stripping away what makes a Star Wars movie fun and a good adventure. You need those things. And in a film that starts off incredibly fast-paced, although not nearly as incredibly fast-paced as when I first started watching it, now the pacing doesn't bother me at all. But as a film that does move at a really quick pace at the beginning, when you get further into the movie, you need those action sequences. It's part of the film. And so there's no portion of the movie where I could see you could strip away anything to go and add in what was put in the book, unless you go and make the movie longer. And again, then you're into that conundrum of, well, we can't make the movie longer. It doesn't really work that way. This is why books are important. And this is how books fit in. For the general movie-going audience, you get a film that leaves some ambiguity, which Star Wars does all the time, has always done, and we're going to talk a little bit about this in just a moment when it comes to the one line that changed everything in Star Wars, right? But at the same time, if there's a desire for the fans to want more, they can get the book and have some of those details filled in, and I really like that. I think that's incredibly smart. I think it's good for the fandom. I think it's good for growing the fandom. The hardcore fans will get more of what they were looking for. They may not like what those answers are or what those details are, but they can read the book and get more than what the movie gave. It could potentially enhance your movie watching experience when you go and watch The Rise of Skywalker later. And at the same time, the general audience gets this really fun, fantastic, tightly crafted, not too long film that they can go and enjoy that doesn't get bogged down with a lot of stuff. The sparseness of Star Wars works for Star Wars. And when you go back and certainly look at the original trilogy, I think The Rise of Skywalker really has a lot to do with has a lot to compare to the original trilogy in the way that it handles the action sequences and some of those specific details, especially when it relates to being minimal on particular issues that you can go and find out in a book. You go back and watch that original trilogy, and there's a lot of things left open. I mean, the Emperor, right? We get a little bit of him in a hologram in The Empire Strikes Back, and then we get the Emperor, walking upright. We see him for the first time, but we never got much of a backstory on him. It was left very ambiguous, and the list goes on and on and on. So, for me personally, I like this dynamic and how it works out. If I'm ever blessed enough to have my EMBARK space opera series turned into movies, a movie or a series of movies, or a TV, well, not a TV show, that's different, but a movie or a series of movies, I fully expect that there's going to be a majority of what's in my books that isn't going to end up on the screen, and a lot of that stuff's going to get changed. Now, that's a little different when you're adapting a book to the screen, but it is to say that it would serve the same purpose. You make EMBARK the motion picture, and you're going to get a little bit of what's in the book, but then you can go back in the book and get it filled in. I mean, and I love the way that those two things work together. And ultimately, like I said, I like the decisions that were made around Palpatine and Snoke. I'm looking forward to further explanations. I'm looking forward to potentially further clarification of how the whole Snoke and Palpatine thing works. I know that in the final edition of the Rise of Kylo Ren comic book, some pages got leaked out, and they certainly allude to Kylo Ren's or Ben Solo's fall to the dark side and turning into Kylo Ren. There's some speech bubbles that are around both Snoke and Palpatine within the same page, and they're uniquely colored different and they match. So the implication in my mind is that Palpatine was indeed, through his decrepit clone vessel, was actually going and influencing and working through Snoke that he created. That's cool to me, and I'd like to see further explanation, but that in and of itself, that's enough for me, to the point where I go and watch The Last Jedi, and now I can look at it through those lenses, and it creates this different sort of vibe with the movie in a good and positive way, and that the purpose of Snoke was to push Kylo Ren to see just how committed to the dark side he was. I mean, that's my headcanon. That's what's been alluded to, that was the whole reason, was that Snoke was there doing Palpatine's bidding while he waited to launch his final order. In the meantime, he had this apprentice in Kylo Ren that he'd been training that he needed to push to see if he would stay true to the dark side. And it's interesting, too, because you take that perspective and you apply it to The Rise of Skywalker and the scene after the Pisana and the leap over the TIE fighter that Rey does on Pisana. And afterwards, Kylo Ren says, I pushed you on Pisana because I wanted you to see it. Almost a similar circumstance. Kylo Ren is now pushing Rey to show her power so that hopefully she'll accept that she's the Palpatine and turn to the dark side. I dig that. I really, really do. So, again, I kind of got off topic there, but my point is I really am appreciative, and I like the way that Disney, Lucasfilm, Star Wars, the way they've always done it, where we get the movies, and then we get these books written by these fantastic authors. Love to write one of these days. By these fantastic authors who give us the possibility to see more of what the story that we saw on screen, so that when we go back to watch the movie again, when it's released on home video, we have a slightly different perspective and can watch it through the eyes of somebody, you can watch it through the lens of, hey, I know more about this now. When you see Snoke in the jar, in the jars, a little bit more now. And when you watch Palpatine, he's in a clone body. I dig that, and I think it's cool.
We have a spark that'll light the fire that'll burn the First Order down.
All right, I don't want to spend a ton of time on this. It was just kind of a thought that popped into my head earlier this week. And I thought I'd bring it up on the show because I found it was interesting. You guys all remember this scene from a little film that was released back in May of 1977 called Star Wars: A New Hope.
No, my father didn't fight in the wars. He was a navigator on a spice freighter.
That's what your uncle told you. He didn't hold with your father's ideals, thought he should have stayed here and not gotten involved.
You fought in the Clone Wars?
Yes. I was once a Jedi Knight, the same as your father.
That, I have no idea what was happening there at the end of it. That line, just real quick, I just wanted to throw this out there. Little meta. It's a little on the meta scale, but just want to toss it out there. That line, you fought in the Clone Wars. That changed everything, man. Think about it. That one little line. Now, I've never heard, and I think that George Lucas may have brought it up on the commentary. It's been a while since I've listened to the commentary of A New Hope, but I wonder if George had any idea at the time how big that one little line was going to be when it came to the future content of Star Wars, right? I mean, think of everything that came out of it. I mean, look, the whole prequel trilogy circles around that. And now, to a certain extent, it ends up playing a huge part in the sequel trilogy as well. One line. You fought in the Clone Wars. And I dig that, man. I really do. I think that's awesome. Even if George had no intention whatsoever of ever doing that. Again, the ambiguity. The power of that one line and not having any backstory on it. Even as a kid, just the Clone Wars. What in the world? I remember as a kid hearing that and just envisioning what that meant. A bunch of people that looked the same all battling, right? And it's kind of what we ended up getting, with what George Lucas ended up doing with the Clone Wars as precursors to Stormtroopers, being created by Sidious ultimately to have an army at his disposal when he went and brought about the war, the Clone Wars themselves. That's just amazing, and it's inspirational too. It's something that, because of that line, I've included little tiny things in the stories that I'm writing, not because I know what I'm going to do with it, but because, you know what, I'm going to throw this in here because I think it's cool. And then if I want to go back and play with it later, I can go back and play with it later. I'm writing an in-between side story, an EMBARK adventure between books 3, which is the finale of the Earth trilogy arc, which comes out next month, and then book 5, which will kick off a new trilogy. Book 4 is going to be a spin-off book, a shorter book, a very personal book, a sort of a single adventure, and I don't want to give the title yet because it kind of ruins a bit of what happens in the Vanishing War. But that story is very much along the same lines of you fought in the Clone Wars. I did something in the Vanishing War that is now going to, not a throwaway thing, but it's an event that happens that doesn't really have a major impact on the overall story of the main Earth trilogy of EMBARK books 1, 2, and 3, but is providing me the opportunity to take that one little thing that happened and go and write its own story. And that was brought about by the inspiration of George Lucas when he went and put in that line in A New Hope.
No,
and just,
my father didn't fight in the wars. He was a navigator on a spice freighter.
That's what your uncle told you. He didn't hold with your father's ideals, thought he should have stayed here and not gotten involved.
You fought in the Clone Wars?
Yes.
I don't think George had any idea, right? How could you know? How could you know that it was going to be what it was going to be? And then that one little line would end up, right? All these decades later, that one little line has people going to their Disney Plus app now every Friday to watch a new episode of the final season, which was the 7th season of the Clone Wars. And how many countless episodes in a complete trilogy, and even what happened with the Rise of Skywalker. I just think that's rad.
I need someone to show me my place in all this.
Like I said, one show this week. It's going to include some listener feedback, and I've got that for you now. We'll start off with Jen G. She writes this. Hey, John, I'm with your wife. I like things resolved. I get so many things unresolved in my life. I definitely need it in my real life. I'm all for imagination, but that's what books are for. I love how this past week Screen Rant had headlines, Disney confirms Reylo wasn't romantic or something like that. I didn't click on it, but I figured it had something to do with the whole gratitude thing. And we talked about this on last week's show, A Kiss of Gratitude, right? I'm just tired of all that mess, but it never ceases. I can't wait to read the book. Enjoyed the podcast this week, and in your honor, and in honor of your okayness with the vague Knights of Ren and the Rise of Skywalker, I ordered all the Funko Pop Knights of Ren. 2 questions before I go. Do you think having Luke, Leia, and Han in this trilogy was a negative in any way? Did it hinder some folks from letting go? And then I read a rumor, possible spoiler, that Taika Waititi is returning for season 2 to write and possibly be back as IG-11 or similar. Would you like an IG-11 type character in season 2? I love IG-11, by the way. And I'm not a Marvel ensemble movie person. I almost hate them. I like their standalones better, but I would choose Star Wars anyways. All right, thank you for the comment, Gen G. To your questions. Taika Waititi absolutely returning. Yes, wholeheartedly. I think he's amazing and incredibly funny and talented. That final episode of Mandalorian, in my opinion, is the best. There's the writing in it's great. It's funny. Some of the shots in it are incredible. There's a shot of IG-11 with the child right before the Mandalorian logo pops up, where he screams by on the speeder bike at an angle, and it's just an amazing shot. I dig it. And I definitely want another IG-11 character. As a matter of fact, I was so inspired by the way that the sequel trilogy has been treating droids when it comes to L3, K2SO, IG-11, and again, that goes back to the other movies, but I was so inspired by that I did some stuff in the Vanishing War in honor of that. So yes, I would absolutely love to have Taika Waititi back, and I want him desperately to do a Star Wars movie. To your other question, Luke, Han, and Leia in the trilogy in a negative way. That's tough, man. I don't think that Disney had any way around it. Unless they were to go and unless Disney had gone and done what it is they're doing now, right? Which we hear they're doing, and that is the next theatrical releases will be a part right from the Skywalker saga. Since they were intent on closing out the Skywalker saga with episodes 7, 8, and 9, you had to have Luke, Leia, and Han in there. I didn't personally need them. I was totally fine going on this adventure without them, but I do think it would have been strange if they kept with that timeline to just dismiss what happened. And look, the events around Carrie Fisher's passing didn't make things any easier for him, right? They had And this idea that the sequel trilogy wasn't planned out. Look, it was planned out to a certain extent. The directors were allowed, JJ and Ryan were allowed to do what they wanted to do, but it was planned out to a certain extent. And that was key when we were all told from the get-go that one was going to be Han's movie, one was going to be Luke's movie, and one was going to be Leia's movie. So I think that regardless of if you put Luke, Han, and Leia in there or didn't, there was still going to be controversy because it was tied to the original trilogy. It'll be very interesting to see how the whole thing shakes out with this new trilogy. Rumor alert, a bunch of postings popped up this week on several different websites talking about listing Rian Johnson as being the writer and director for a trilogy of films starting in 2022. So I'm not putting a lot of stock in it. I think those pages are pages that anybody can edit, but it was worth mentioning. And thank you for the email, Jen G. Friend of the show, Miranda, writes this: Marvel is Marvel, Star Wars is Star Wars. They stand and fall on their own merits. Both finales are epic and controversial in their own ways. Both have blown up at the box office. Both have passionate fan bases. Without Star Wars, we would not have the MCU. And without the MCU's influence on modern cinema, it would not have helped Star Wars. Miranda, your comments are always so awesome. To be better than it has ever been. Therefore, both have changed cinema and will continue to influence cinema in decades to come. End of mini rant. Thank you, Miranda. SM Palto says this: as someone who was angered by the ending, the voice in her head would have been enough. I have no idea. The voice in her head, meaning from the book of Kylo Ren speaking to Rey at the end of the film, so that. So we get a little bit more of Ben Solo speaking to Rey at the end of the film after he passes away. I have no idea why we didn't get that in the film. It helps. It's not perfect by any stretch, but damn, does it help. Some sort of closure for both characters, not to mention for the audience. I appreciate your comments, and again, it's one of those things where I disagree. If they had included it, fine, but I'm totally fine with how it ended otherwise. But again, we're all entitled to our opinion, and I really do appreciate you writing in. Snoke's Missing Hairpiece says this: Star Wars has things to say. Marvel movies are bland cash grabs with no substance and won't be remembered or revered as much as Star Wars. I don't necessarily disagree with that. I don't. People love their MCU, don't get me wrong. They make a ton of money. But when it comes to the mythology, there's not a lot of deep dives into the mythology. At least not that I see, right? It reminds me a lot of like Avatar. Avatar, one of the highest grossing films of all time, and yet that's just not part of the cultural zeitgeist. You don't see a lot of blue, 10-foot-tall blue cat people cosplays going on at conventions. Although at the moment, we're not going to see them at conventions for a while. All right, a couple more here, and they come from a friend of the show, Brian Martin. Let's see. He asked this. If Rey's father wasn't Force sensitive, okay, then how did Rey inherit any of it? Can Force sensitivity skip a generation or something? Well, if you remember in The Last Jedi, as, during the training, Luke said, the Force is in everyone. Some people are simply more in tune to it than others. Leia had it. Luke was stronger. We find out that Finn has some Force sensitivity. Rey is much stronger. The son, in my opinion, that would be Palpatine's son, simply didn't tap into it, right? Or it wasn't as strong in him as it became in Rey. And that's kind of my takeaway, because I know he was asking, like, why wasn't, Palpatine's son, right? To me, that's what it is. The son didn't embrace it. It wasn't strong with him. We can argue midichlorians if you want to argue midichlorians, but go back to The Force Awakens and the title of the movie, The Force Awakens. Darkness rises in the light to meet it. So in the rising darkness of Kylo Ren at the training of Snoke, Rey is awakened to her Force, right? And more specifically, now we know the dyad, which again is a concept that I absolutely I love that dyad concept. So look, that wraps up the show for this week. And again, just one show this week because I want to have some time to not have to think about anything, but just hanging with my family and watching Star Wars and chilling out in the middle of all of this. And I hope you guys will do the same. I hope the show, was helpful in some way, shape, or form, and didn't kind of bum you out at the start, or my opinions on how much I love the rise of Skywalker. I do this show because I love talking about Star Wars, and that's always been the motivation behind it. I'm just blessed enough to have individuals like you that hop on board and listen every single week. And I can't tell you how much that means to me, and I appreciate it. If you want to show your appreciation beyond just downloading the show every week, tell a friend about it. And as I mentioned too, don't do any Patreon. But if you really want to support the show and you haven't done it yet, I really hope that you'll take a moment, especially now since a lot of us are going to be cooped up at home, and pick up a copy of EMBARK, Treasure in EMBARK Book 1 or EMBARK Book 2, Treasure in Darkness, an ebook, a paperback, or audiobook narrated by me. All three of those will be coming out sometime next month. We're editing the Vanishing War right now. I am close to finishing Book 4 already, which I hope to have out by the end of the year, and I've already done some work on Book 5. I really love writing these stories, and I've been getting some amazing feedback as of late. A friend of the show, Severin, who has been working through the books after her husband purchased the EMBARK books for her, has been writing me, telling me her experiences of reading Treasure in Darkness. And I got to do a quick shout-out to her because she wrote this extensive email reading Book 2, and she's not even finished yet. And it's just amazing that there's so many things in the book that I tried to do that worked. I'll read you a comment here. The general visual aura I get from reading Book 1 of EMBARK reminds me a little of what you get from movies like Blade Runner, The Fifth Element, and especially Total Recall, the original one, right? But not nearly as dark or dystopian as stated above. Not as hard to comprehend how technology has advanced and what the space travel capabilities are. I feel like the tone in this story is a lot more cheerful than what we get in films like Blade Runner, etc., and I like that a lot. That, right, brings warm feelings to my heart because that was my intention. And those movies, all of those movies are an inspiration on this book. So to have individuals come back reading these books and talking about the music choices in some of the pop culture references that I included in the book and how the things that they're visualizing in the book remind them of these particular science fiction stories, that was the intent all along. And she writes, EMBARK is fictional, but still somewhat believable fiction, and that's exactly what I was going for. So just thank you so much for that. And again, if you haven't purchased the book yet, please go to Amazon.com right now, look for Jon Justice and EMBARK and pick up your copy. If you're just listening for the first time and like, John, what in the Sam heck are these books even about? They're written like movies. I write books for people that love movies. And for those that don't know what the first book is about, here you go. For Earth, the end is near. Only a reluctant hero and the girl he loves have the power to save humanity's future. It's the not-so-distant future, and car culture is replaced by air and space flight, made possible by two of Earth's largest corporations. Flight mechanic Taft Guardia spends his free time racing through the skies with his three best friends and the girl he longs to be with, headstrong Keith Amaro. With the planet on the brink of an industrial apocalypse, a powerful and ruthless corporate madman, Sint Argum, moves to exploit the disaster with his covertly created military. When Taft, Keitha, and their friends uncover a shocking secret, Sint Argum will stop at nothing to find them. Time on Earth is running out, but with the help of a ragtag group of young pilots, they'll fight for humanity's future and survival among the stars.
My Nerd World.
So if you're looking at theming your book reading and entertainment and you want to read a story about the end of the world that's not about a virus, EMBARK is the perfect book for you. I hope you go and pick up a copy. If you've already read them and you haven't left a positive review on Amazon, please go to Amazon and do that. I really would appreciate it. Stay safe out there. Stay positive. Let me know what it is you're doing to keep yourself happy, Star Wars related or otherwise, through this whole thing. I'll be back again next week. Hopefully it's a better week ahead, and you all have a great weekend and stay safe. And again, prayers out to everybody who's dealing with this, regardless of the circumstances surrounding you, or where you are. It's moments like this where we have an opportunity to come together, certainly in a fandom, but even on a community, and a national level and a global level. And it feels corny to say, but it's true. We're going to get through this. And Star Wars is there to distract us and to be entertainment. It's important, but not the most important thing, but I hope you're able to take advantage of it, and maybe the little advice I gave of treating it like it's a holiday will ring true for you. So, again, head on over to Amazon.com. I hope to pick up a copy of the book, and it'll provide you with some welcome reprieve from the news of the day. I'll be back again next week, and here's now Obi-Wan Kenobi to tell you those so important words.
The Force will be with you, always.
My nerd world.